relatively casual. I want this to be a conversation. And so what I was thinking is give you an opportunity to talk at your small table groups first about the first question, and then we'll open it up to the larger group to have the conversation, and then we'll kind of go to the second question and so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
If you need reference to the questions, I also posted those questions on Hamilton Matters on the CIM site. If you go to interactive writing and scroll all the way down, I later posted the questions there, so you'll be able to get them.
And before we do that though, were there any questions about what you saw? Like you weren't sure about something or something didn't fit with the structure that you thought?
Of course.
Pam, go for it.
I always do. Yeah, and Ann was asking the same question.
Yeah.
The second part, we're with the interactive writing
Yep.
and the correctness of the spelling. The chart, the example was there was the word bird,
Yep.
capital R. She did not correct it and fix it. But yet when she wrote little, she did write it as it would be found in a book. I get why you wouldn't do that in independent writing. And I like her in the independent writing, she said, would you like to see what it would look like in a book? So I see that. What's Doran's philosophy on the chart?
So she doesn't really say what, and I don't know, that was a question I didn't ask Debbie about. I certainly can ask her and get back to you with the answer for that as to why she did it. Kind of where we sit with that is what Debbie was doing with where the kids were coming up and actually writing on the board is not, Doran kind of leaves that up to the individual educator and knowing your group. So if management-wise it is too much for kids to be walking up and it's a big hassle and you can't manage that, then you do all of the writing and they do their writing on the boards. My guess would be, and I can't remember who wrote it, did Logan write the R? I can't remember. So Logan is, if you got hinted, is probably her most tentative learner with letters. He was the little guy in the black shirt in the first lesson, and I can't remember what color shirt he was wearing in the second lesson.
Who's on the left?
Yeah.
So he had the MN confusion?
Yeah, he was the one who referred back to the letter chart a lot. If he was the one who wrote it, she may have let it go because that's what he currently could control. I'm not sure, but the general answer would be know your students, and if the student up there, that's what they can currently control is the capital R, then that's what they contribute, and what you could have done is say, you're right, that's one way we could write it, another way we could write it is this way. So.
Well, same with that, Pam. Do you remember when they did the E's, where they did sleep?
Yeah.
He did a capital E and a lowercase, just like you see in an alphabet chart, but I'm surprised that wasn't corrected.
Yeah.
But
And
that
again,
wasn't the purpose of that, I suppose.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
so-
think about, what I always say to teachers is, we make the best decisions we can in the moment, and likely, if she were to watch that again, she'd probably go, yeah, probably should have done that, and should have corrected that, so,
And there's that fine line too.
yeah,
Correcting it and wanting to look standard versus working in their zone of,
yes.
professional
Yeah.
development too,
One thing I might, hearing what you guys say, and thinking about what I saw in the video now also, is I might have given Debbie feedback and saying that could be one way you could take the kids in the step of editing their writing. Now go through and run your finger under, look, do you have capitals anywhere where they're not supposed to be? So that could be a nice next step for them as far as a modeling piece and moving them in a different direction. But yeah, yeah.
her language was outstanding. And I know I pushed for consistent language with letter formation so that the teacher talk becomes self-taught.
Yeah.
Do you have a standard set of language that's used in the classroom and by interventionists? Okay. I'm guessing there's a consistent alphabet in the classroom and in the intervention, because these are our most fragile. New alphabet.
Yeah, with one exception. So you heard Logan say in my classroom, it's toothbrush. So we have one teacher in that kindergarten who is piloting the new Lucy Calkins phonics units of study. It's that classroom. So That's why he's using a different alphabet chart, but yes, all of our kindergarten classrooms have the same alphabet chart as the interventionists. They're actually using the font system LLI alphabet chart, is the one that Debbie had up.
So is that something we should
Um,
have within our buildings to all have, I mean?
The more you can connect what you're doing in intervention with what you're doing in the classroom, the better opportunities students will have to have that generalization and transfer into the classroom. Yeah.
And wouldn't it make sense to have one standard across the district? Just I'm thinking kids coming from Willow, I can tell the ones, they'll remember from Willow the alphabet chart. And I can tell right away the ones who have come from Willow or somewhere else just by
Yeah.
them saying that. So a district-wide
Mhm.
consistent chart would be awesome.
We do not have a district-wide. Ben Franklin uses something different from Shady Lane, but our 4K is right in our 4K through second grade buildings. But yes, the more you can have that transferability, the better you are. But yes, we do have the same thing, and then the verbal pathways that we use for letter formation is this consistently used 4K through second grade.
Would you share that with us, please?
It's handwriting without tears.
It is handwriting.
So the
See, all
verbal
the
pathways, the language she was
We've
using.
shifted some of them with our help of our OTs, because some of them were not, like, when you said the helicopter one,
Yeah.
we shifted some of that because it provided a visual connection for kids. So we used our OTs for that, with that. But yeah,
So will you?
handwriting without.
But I like some of the adaptations that I heard.
Our
What's that
books
R?
still say handwriting without tears.
What is the art? That was new to me, how she made the art.
I left my notes, I think it was,
The hump, or no, what?
you,
Swim
something about
Swim
swim
back
back up.
Swim up,
Swim
swim
back
up, yep, that was.
And another one is jump up, which I thought was very effective.
Yep,
When she hits the bottom line, bump, bump, is that what it is?
I heard it was from jump up. Is that, did it used to be that?
I don't know what it can be, but I do know it's written down. So we have each letter with the verbal pathway written down. Yeah, I'll see if I can.
I'll send you one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
yeah. Each letter with, what did you say?
Verbal pathway. Our OTs were really the ones who helped us with that piece of it.
I love that.
Okay, anything else, logistical questions? All right, so let's have you first talk through from what you saw, what were the students' strengths? And I would add to that is, how did Debbie, who's the interventionist in that, how did she use those strengths, or did she use those strengths to build off of, so using known to build into the unknown? All right, let's come back together and have a whole group conversation. Take last, like next 25 seconds to wrap up your conversation.
It's tricky.
Oh, yeah, take it away, take it away, for a different end.
All right, so let's talk through what were some of the students' strengths and how or if was Debbie using those strengths to build into the unknown, or what their new learning might be. What do you guys think? Which one? No, I added that one. And I'll tell you why I added that one, because we have a training coming up about using the known to move to the unknown, so it's got my brain thinking a little bit, wheels turning. So.
that?
Yeah. What do you guys think? What did you talk about at your tables?
One of the strengths we saw with the students was that they all knew what to do for each part of the task and were very efficient with each phase. And even when one needed a little bit more help, the other could be independent doing it. So it seemed like they didn't waste time. They were very engaged. They got things accomplished.
reading, finding, making? Or kind of that?
They're hearing the beginning sounds of words, like my bed, they could hear the M and mine. And they're referring to their ABC chart. They were very independent and looking at their ABC chart. Some needed help maybe to find it, but they need to look for the assistance.
So what's the, I heard somebody talk about the structure. You had mentioned the structure, that they all knew the parts of the structure. What's the benefit of kids of that? When you're working in an intervention structure, what's the benefit of them knowing the structure, having that kind of knowledge of what's coming next? What's
Keep them moving.
I also think for some of our youngest learners, it teaches them about what do we expect in school? Like, what are the school expectations? What does it look like to be a learner? Because I think some of our kindergartners, so Gio, the one in the middle, I don't know if you caught it, he's new to our district, he came from Georgia. And so some of the expectations in our district are very different than the district that he came in and what he's used to. And so some of it is about teaching students, what do we expect in our system? What does it look like to be a learner? And I think her little guys, there was this nice ebb and flow, like they still felt comfortable having conversation with her, but they also, they very much knew that they were there to learn and there to take on some new learning. I heard other people talk about the knowledge of letters and resources. Let's talk a little bit about the knowledge of or how they use their resources. What did you observe about that, and why might that have been a benefit?
Because you want them to, when they're with you, you want them to build their confidence when they leave your intervention space and move into the classroom. And hopefully in the classroom, they may have that ABC chart or the alphabet chart on the wall, and then they know they can use that resource when they are writing and reading, to have that. And then I always try to give them that language. Now when you are in the classroom, you can be using this resource too.
I heard a couple groups ask about how Debbie did the letter identification chart. She said A, apple. I will tell you that is the great debate. Every time we come together as a group, there is a conversation about whether it should be A, apple, or B, bear, or if we should do the letters. So the way Debbie is doing it right now is a reading recovery procedure. Reading recovery, when they read their ABC books, do not read the sound. Megan Formolo, who is our reading recovery teacher leader, and I have kind of settled in a happy medium that we want kids to be as flexible as they can be. And so why wouldn't you do both? Why wouldn't sometimes you really focus on if you want letter identification and that's your focus, like Debbie's was a letter formation identification. Could you focus on the letters and then gradually move them into A, apple? I don't know that there is a right or wrong way to do it. I think the important piece is, what is your purpose behind a linking chart? So let's talk a little bit about that first. What is a purpose? Why would you have a linking chart? Because there is a reason and there's a philosophy behind why you have that linking chart. So let's talk a little bit about, as a whole group, why might you have a linking chart? Yeah.
So Lena and I were talking about this today. What we thought it was an automatic, boom, boom, you see, read the book, bear. Just that they don't think about it, they just go.
Any other reasons? Think about Logan, because I think Logan is a perfect example of a kid who relied heavily on that linking chart. Like, there's a lot that Logan is super tentative about. Like, that M and N, super tricky for him, and he thinks he's got it and he doesn't. You could just see he was switching back and forth those letters. That linking chart not only becomes about the sound and the word, but it also becomes about how does the picture look. It becomes the tool that he can go back to, the constant that helps him when he thinks about seeing that in different contexts. That's the constant that he can go back to. And so that linking chart is really important, and that's why having a similar linking chart in the classroom is so important, because that, when Logan goes back to his writer's workshop, and he's sitting there, and he's maybe not as independent as the rest of the students in his class are, that becomes a tool that he could hopefully rely on to be that much more independent. So the linking chart is actually, in my opinion, one of the most important pieces of this early intervention. The other piece that I want to just point out with the linking chart is it absolutely should, and I think Debbie's was a little slow, that linking chart should be done very quickly. A, apple, B, bear, C, cat, D, dog. And the rationale behind that is we want that automatic thinking. We don't want them to sit and have to process through that. It should just automatically write A, apple. That's A, I know that one. So that, I think Debbie's was even a little slow, and pretty supportive, because the kids weren't taking on, although they were really super fascinated that I was there with the video camera, so that may have been part of it. But, all right, let's look at the second question. Actually, any other strengths that you wanted to bring up? Sorry, I didn't want to move on too quickly.
What about a linear?
Tell me more about that.
Well, there are times when I have students that don't do well with return sweep right away, and sometimes I'll just get my linear one out, and we'll do that. We'll do it different days, so it's not the same thing every day. Sometimes I know it's good to have a routine, and you should do it a lot so they're used to it. But then, you know how sometimes we say the same things at church maybe, and we don't even think about what we're saying? It's just an example. But you know what I mean? You know what I mean? So I feel like sometimes I like some different things to do, so they're just not like rotely doing it and not even thinking about what they're doing, or not even really looking at what they're doing. I'm just asking you, like, would that be acceptable?
I don't know that it's about acceptability or not acceptability. It's about what's going to benefit your students. And that's the biggest thing that I can tell you about all of Doran's interventions is it's about being responsive to your students. So if having a linear alphabet chart is what's going to help your students, then by all means, go for it. But there are other ways that you can keep the alphabet linking chart fresh once the kids have gotten to know it well enough. You can do, like Debbie talked about, the little Logan asked, could we read it down this way? You can do things like that. You can read just the consonants, just the vowels. We've had teachers do things where they play a game with the linking chart, where I'm going to say a word, you find the letter that matches that. That's for when your kids are a little further in. But there are lots of different ways to shift the purpose of the linking chart as you go through lessons. So early in lessons, it's about a letter identification and connecting it. Later in lessons, it's about using it as a tool for hearing first letter sounds, or hearing last letter sounds, or even hearing medial letter sounds. So the purpose of it shifts as the complexity of your lessons and the complexity of your skills shifts. So yeah, I kind of sit in as long as you're not reading the alphabet chart this way, I think as long as you have a rationale for why you're doing what you're doing, absolutely. So, other thoughts on that? Okay, let's talk a little bit at your tables about what was Debbie doing to help her students, and what level of support was she using, high, medium, low, and what would you, if you were her coach, what would you have suggested she might have done differently as far as levels of support? Because I already jotted some things down that I would tell her. Just for a little different format.
You should really be in there.
I'm going to have each table kind of summarize what they talked about, and then I want to just look at one particular, or think about one particular part of the video. So let's start with this front table. Oh, one person at your table is just going to summarize what your group talked about for the good of the whole group, and then we're gonna talk a little bit, I wanna talk a little bit more about one part of the video. So we'll start with the front table.
What? Got it. So what we talked about in regard to helping the children, Sarah?
Yeah,
Specific?
support.
Okay. Well, that's funny, because my actual first thought was that it was a very high level of support, and some of my friends here thought it was not. And then the more we talked about it, this is new to me, sorry, but it is. But the understanding of where we started at the very beginning of session 1 or phase 1, and then by the end of phase 2, I did see a lot more independence. So perhaps for my misunderstanding, it was the format of the lesson that I'm still learning myself. I just thought she was really very guiding, which you have to be in intervention with, little guys. But I did think it was a very high level of help that she was giving, which is what we do in intervention anyway. But so then you guys thought it differently, and we.
One of you who thought it wasn't as high level as support, would you be willing to share why?
Well, okay. So, I guess, regarding the chart, she didn't say, Logan, the letter's right here. She said, now you know where to look. So that was maybe guiding, but yet she didn't tell him what it was.
How about, could you guys just summarize what this table talks about? Somebody.
You had said like one thing like we could have coached her teacher.
Yeah.
There was one point, I can't remember if it was the first video or second video, the one little boy kept saying, oh, there's that letter that's in my name, there's that letter that's in my name. And she kept going, and I thought, oh, that would have been a perfect opportunity to say, oh, you were noticing that. Just to celebrate that he's recognizing that. So that was like the only thing I thought she did a wonderful job. We thought she supported each child when they were done with their writing. She gave an opportunity to go to each one and say, okay, this is where you are in your learning, and she coached them, celebrated with them, and then gave them a learning point, went to the next child, did the same thing, and then to the next child. So that's kind of what we talked about.
We thought that, again, it was a very well done lesson. One part that stuck out was the M&N sort seemed to be kind of lengthy. Like, at what point do you just, be done with it kind of thing? And then there was that one that looked a little odd. So afterwards, she was like, oh, this one doesn't really fit either.
Yeah, you could almost see the light bulb going on, like, oh, this is why this is a little confusing, because this doesn't fit the.
Like, throw that one out.
Yeah.
I think we've all done that.
Oh, absolutely.
We've all done
Right.
that in Erie lessons, where it's like, well, I just did that way too much, I should have just moved on
Yeah.
and didn't.
Yeah. The one interesting part, and I do agree that piece lagged on, and that's one of the pieces of the feedback that I gave Debbie, but one of the interesting pieces about that part is when you talk about the phases or the levels of support and how we shift on that scale of scaffolding, her interaction with Logan during that, while lengthy, to me was a really interesting example of where you could enter at a low level support and then gradually increase your level of support. Because and I had to write it down for myself because I knew I wasn't gonna remember it. But she started at a low level because she asked him, just kind of pointed it, I think asked him if this was right or something, and that's when he started switching things around, which became clear he didn't know what he was looking for. That's when she brought the ABC chart in. The ABC chart wasn't helping him, so then she brought in the marker board to explicitly teach it. And while it was very lengthy, it was just an interesting example to me when you're thinking about moving up the scale of support. You enter at a low support, and then you have to gradually increase your supports as you're gaining information from the child. I did see that was kind of an interesting example of that. And how she did that. So that's just something to keep in mind when we think about our supports within a lesson. Even though that interactive writing is a highly supportive structure to begin with, there is still room for you to scaffold in different ways according to where you think students are at. And what was interesting is following this lesson, Debbie said to me, I realize now that Logan has a lot more a lot more work and is a lot more tentative than I initially thought he was. So she learned some things about Logan through that interaction, which I think is really important to note. What did you guys think about her level of scaffolding and her students' independence during the writing part?
I'm sorry, I didn't know there. Can you
Yeah,
say
that's
that
okay.
again?
What did you think about her level of scaffolding and her students' level of independence during the independent writing? What do you guys think? Go
I
ahead.
feel like I'm just talking all the time. Sometimes when she'd get them started, but when she went to another child, they would stop. So they're not quite there.
Yeah. So that was my coaching points around her, was how is she going to leave them in a way that they could keep going. You'll notice my video camera kind of stuck on the kids. I was waiting for them to do something. And the cool thing was Eli, who's the itty bitty one, he was, it looked like he was on the verge, like he was gonna write some down. He was looking at his ABC chart, he was gonna write some down, and then he went up to his picture and started coloring. I was like, no! But that's something to think about when and it's really hard when you're managing multiple kids in a group, but what happens when you turn to move to the next child? Do your students continue to work? Do they have the independence to use their resources in a way that's productive and useful? Or do they sit or go back to the coloring and drawing? So that was a piece of coaching that I asked Debbie to think about, was how are you going to ensure that independent writing time is the most productive? And the rationale behind that is when they go into the classroom, that's their reality. There isn't a teacher that's sitting next to them 100% of the writer's workshop. So they have to have tools and tactics in their pockets that they can utilize to stay engaged and to be independent during that writing time. So that's our goal as interventionists, is how do we help them do that? So that's just something to keep in mind as you're, yeah.
And so what suggestions? Because I'm sitting there thinking, that is one of my big struggles, is when I'm helping this one write, this one has stopped. And I can come back and get that, but it's not enough. They're not independent of that writing part, and that's probably one of my biggest struggles, is how to do that. And I only have 2 of them.
So I didn't actually give Debbie feedback. Debbie reflected on it herself, and what she came up with was that before she turned and left that child, like if with Eli, I think he was looking for the ending sound. She should have said to him, "What are you going to do to find that?" So he has, and then she would have turned, so that he had an idea with that. So that's a piece that, again, as coaches, I try not to give my teachers the suggestions. I try to say, well, what could you have tried? What would you have done differently in order to promote that? So that's something to think about. But yeah, Debbie reflected on one thing she was going to try with them is giving, like, what are you going to do to find that letter and then turn? Yeah. Yeah. Another useful tool is a checklist, but at kindergarten it has to be a picture checklist. So if you're done teaching kids that they can go through and look for, did they leave spaces? Did they put capitals in different places? They could go back and reread. Also teaching them that she started to do it with Eli when he was doing T-Rex. You can add more to your picture and then label. That's a big piece. When I asked her about that, I said, how come we didn't have the other 2? She did not feel that they were ready to do that. She felt like Eli was at a place where he could take that on. So. All right. Any other thoughts, suggestions, comments about the level of support? Okay. Let's give you a few minutes to talk about the third question. I have to go back and look. Which is, what additional steps might Debbie have taken in order to help her students move forward? what should she have done, what could she have done differently? We talked a little bit about this, but think about the whole lesson. What could she have done differently?
What could they have done differently? The last question.
And maybe
She
she
didn't like stop, she went,
Before leaving them.
yeah, because she did stop and then she would, so she would do this, but then she would do it again. Yep.
I think we all tend to do that, you know, like, you know, let's do that, and we're just like, let's get this done. Right?
But see, I will grab a student, my freshman, and let them touch, like when you were saying about the touching, like, I have to watch the time. I will have my little Owen touch. Because guess what, everybody's will have no one's in charge. I don't know.
No one's getting most of it.
Well, my Owen's right now, so yeah, he's just like, but you know, that's, so that's how, you know, when I look at the model, so I have that problem, I will talk over my students, I just don't talk. And I really powerful. I know, that was a good one.
And I think that too, when they say like an exemplar, like she
Without it
had,
being
when
the
she
same, I don't know, like just.
her whole circle had, what was it? It didn't work because some of them had goals, but she really wasn't, it was confusing
Like I'm
to
just wondering,
them.
like, in the picture where you're drawing,
So I'm like, she could have done,
when you don't wanna have them there.
because you can still look at it.
Yeah, you do.
Do you know what I mean? So like.
Well, the one
she
part
just
like, I think it was the one that you correct.
Right.
You can't say the colors.
Like a reference
She
point.
wanted to
So
do
you know,
that.
I will let it go.
But
And then.
I
you went back to
expect,
like three
and
and
then I look
Yeah,
at their,
so
oh, I
mine
have
was
written
on colors.
And again, it depends on what you're looking for.
And I think
But I
it's
think
it's
one
about
thing,
like
they have no details, I drew
five, so
you know, just so that you're not
You guys
just
are
getting
out.
to add more.
set on that lesson plan.
Or maybe even a level of like, I just observe, okay, that's kind of.
All right, wrap up your conversations in the next 30 seconds.
Oh, Asian in the same position is that would just drove me nuts. Because I would have just like, you know, I can handle so much, but then if they're like all over the place.
That's why I'm in there helping you for.
All right, so come back together. I know we touched on this a little bit already, but anything else, if you were in Debbie's shoes, that you would do differently? And the beauty of doing a videotape, and I always tell the teachers this, it's very uncomfortable to be videotaped, and Debbie has the advantage of she's not here to listen to you guys talk about her, but she's awesome. She is awesome. We love her. But when you do a videotape lesson for your peers, the benefit of it is your peers get to see you, get to watch and think about it without having to manage 3 little kindergartners' exuberance in front of them. And so you get the benefit of watching it without having to do all of the in-the-spot thinking. We all know, I've been teaching an intervention for 12 years. I have never had a lesson that has gone exactly how I wanted it to go. When that day comes, I've committed to retiring, no matter how old I am.
Or how young.
True. So that's a piece that I think is a really beautiful part about videotaping. So don't be afraid in this moment to take this opportunity to sit back and look at it from a different set of eyes and give the feedback. That is the opportunity that you have to learn and think, this is what I would have done differently in this situation, so that when you're encountered with that situation, you can think about this and possibly do it in a different way. So what would you have done differently, or what would you give Debbie advice on doing differently?
I feel like
I know we talked a little bit, but anything else?
I'm just curious, like, is this the format then for each day? Because we were talking about a little bit with having an exemplar of some kind, like when they're, like if you wanted them to keep going instead of just stopping and being done. Could you ever have like a picture with like one thing drawn, say, okay, this is not enough, and then a more detailed picture just to kind of or even point like, oh, this one has, and again, I think you said that they were at different places in what they could label independently, but has that been done with having almost like an exemplar or a model of what is expected with that?
That's a great suggestion. I don't know if she's done that, but that is a great suggestion. A great place to do that would be, we talked about that preparing phase that kind of fits in interactive writing but kind of doesn't. That would be a place that the preparing phase would fit. So you could use your mentor text, and then instead of having the kids independently write, you just do the modeled writing, and you could put together like an exemplar of that. Like, this is what your writing would look like if you're, need to add more detail or things like that. But yeah, that's a great suggestion. Anything else?
I was thinking that as they were doing the alphabet chart and how she was up there also saying the letters, quite loud to get it, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, so I'm feeling that she maybe could have phased her voice, faded it out a little bit just for her to hear maybe her students. Like, because I know I've done that before. I'm like, oh, I should have stopped.
Yep.
Yep,
that's a great suggestion. The other suggestion, along with the linking or with the ABC chart is, and I don't know if she felt the kids weren't ready for it, but she could have had an individual chart in front of each of the children to help them attend to the print a little bit more and have their finger in there, so they're a little bit more of an active participant. So that's another piece. And that gets tricky in early lessons because not all kids have the knowledge to be able to do that, so they need a model first. But depending on where your students are at, that's also an option.
Is there a reason, like when she did the, iPad, instead of just the 2 lines for each word, she doesn't give 2 lines for mine and 3 lines for that?
Not the kids weren't there yet.
Okay.
And I don't know that I would do that on their actual writing page. If I were going to do the lines to say, I would do that up on a practice page,
Okay.
so up above. Other thoughts?
I was curious with the letter names when she first started out. I think she said, did you notice there's a new letter in here? And it was the letter R. But then there was no instruction to the letter R or the sound of the R. I don't know if you missed that. That's part of a different lesson. Or, my mind sort of goes to Oregon Gillingham where you go through all of these steps with the new letter. Is that
So she did the sort, she did the sort. What you're saying is she did the sort first and then she instructed in the R, like the formation of the R afterwards. I don't know. That's a good question. I think it seemed to me that both of the kids knew the R, so it didn't seem to be a hang up for them. I think if they hadn't known the R,
Maybe she
maybe.
had done something the day before.
No, because I think she was doing, I think she had done B the day before, or the letters before, but I'm not sure. But I do think that that's something to consider. If you're introducing a brand new letter that they've never seen before, or you know that they don't know, probably putting in a sort isn't the first place. And again, that's one of those trial and error things. I don't think the M and the N actually seem to be the trickier part for Logan. He didn't seem to have a hang up with the R at all. So I think in that situation it's okay, but that is an excellent consideration when you think about how known is their known before you're having them start to do some things independently. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get to the most important part of this is I want you to reflect on what we've talked about tonight and what we saw, and I want you to write down one thing that you learned tonight that you commit to going back and trying or working within your own intervention group. And then I want you to write it down because you're more likely to.
Sorry, what?
Is there something that you heard that you could transfer into a different
That's what I was just saying.
intervention?
It's so much
quick whip around about what people are going to commit to
I'm gonna
doing.
commit to doing that.
So we'll start back there since I started the point before. Pam?
Okay, fine. You know, I know we've talked about level of support, high, middle, low, and it's in the lesson plan, but I really like the idea of pulling out that scale of help from reading recovery and sharing that with teachers as reminders of how do you scaffold that to have high, medium, and low. And I don't know how to do this, but helping, this is just such a reminder of why we don't want to just work with kids one-on-one. Because part of our job is not just to help build those skills, but it's to teach them problem solving and how to help themselves. And I know it's hard for a teacher to, I'm not seeing everything. No, you're not. You can't see everything, but I think that's a small trade-off for balancing what they can learn about being independent. So that's my other message I want to take back.
I also think the oral language piece is huge. I mean, I think I wrote down about Logan, with as confused as he is about letters, some of the academic language that he was using about less and more and things like that. What a great opportunity for his peers around him to hear that language. Yeah, I agree. Corey?
I'm gonna be more consistent with the teachers that I work with and make sure we're using the same alphabet chart first of all. Like I can change that. Like I don't even know, they're probably not even using it consistently across classrooms. And then at least as far as the learning pathways go, being as consistent as we can. I mean, because like they got so much other stuff to think about when they transition to my room and then when they transition back, like that we're throwing that on top of it, like we're telling them different ways to write the letters, like that's gotta be better. So that's what I'm gonna do.
Awesome, thank you.
I was thinking about how to help my students be more independent when I'm not there. So again, whether it's utilizing the time by saying, what are you going to do next, kind of like what we talked about before, turning to the next student so that they can be busy when they're working on their own until you can get to them again, helping them practice that so it can be transferred.
I think that reading through that chart, the Lincoln chart, and getting them to use that in the room and transition it to the classroom is one of the biggest ones. And for my little bit older ones, leaving them with a task when I turn to that other student, making sure I do that consistently.
I'm going to try to say, use the phrase, write it how we see it in a book instead of, let's do it right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna continue, I used it today already, counting the words and making the lines.
Putting on my reading specialist hat, how to do the tier 1 instruction and what we learned tonight and watching the video and sharing that with classroom teachers also, so our interventionists are learning, but how can I share it with classroom teachers too?
I have a really large group that I work with, and I think I want to also work on promoting more independence. They're pretty high level, but this simple concept of even just using your finger and those, say, write pages, and look for, it's a whole other world. But just using your finger to look for letters that you uppercase that shouldn't be, or vice versa.
I'm going to scale back my level of support a little bit and let them take more ownership for their writing.
I was actually going to say the same thing, but about the ABC charts.
Okay.
I feel like that for them tracking it.
I was going to pull up my individual linking charts and we can start using those. We've only been using the big one together.
Okay.
Use a linking chart more than I do, and then also I like what you said with the, may I show you how it would look in a book? Because I think I can do that into really any power group that I have.
Sure.
I'm going to commit to using the linking chart every day, but also as helping teachers choose. We do power groups, so every child is receiving something. But using this program as a basis for interventionists, none of us are using it right now because I didn't know of it. So thank you for this, but that's definitely what I'm going to commit to, is using this within our power groups.
Good. Thank you. I want to just show you one thing. Pam talked about the scale of help with reading recovery. It is also, if you have apprenticeship in literacy, page 24, she has a scale of help here, and she does a actual narrative of an example of going through the scale of help. So apprenticeship for literacy, page 24.
Pam, do you have that?
I think all of
Of course.
the
Of
literacy.
course, so
is
why don't we
posted.
do this then? Will you photocopy those few pages and then we'll link it to our CIM?
Page
The new
24.
version, because there is
Web-
an old
website.
version.
And maybe we.
Page 24?
It's the
Okay.
red version is the old version.
Oh, so we
24.
want green.
The green version.
Green.
Look for it.
All right, and then
Second
we'll
edition.
link it up on our
Okay.
website.
Super.
Yeah.